Hi, it's Makaela here. Thanks for listening to my podcast. What you're about to listen to is an old episode of my podcast, The Midlife Awakening, which has now been replaced with the Deliberately Transformed Woman podcast. You'll still find some golden takeaways in these old episodes, but if you're the type of person who wants to discover and let go of the things that are holding you back in life by busting through fear and procrastination, overcoming imposter syndrome, and stepping into a life that is fulfilling, courageous, and intentional, then my new podcast episodes, starting from episode 21, are the ones you're looking for. You're listening to episode 8 of the Midlife Awakening podcast with Makaela Moore. Welcome to the Midlife Awakening podcast. I'm Makaela Moore, your host and certified transformation coach. I'm a 40-something woman who nerds out on brain science and believes every woman should be financially independent. This podcast is for women navigating their midlife who want to learn the secrets to unlocking their brain and freeing themselves from everything that holds them back so they can create lasting change in their lives, because everything is possible. Join me each week for conversations about the midlife and tips and tricks to hack your subconscious brain so you can deliberately transform your life and ultimately create your own financial security. First time here? Hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Enjoy! Welcome to episode 8. Hope you've had a great week. I'm in the process of getting ready to go to a 4-day conference this week, which is one of the leading women in business retreats in Australia with Angela Henderson Consulting, and I am super excited about spending 4 days with 50 other women who are all making their mark on the world in their own way. We all have very different businesses, some with online businesses, some with physical businesses, and like me, some with both. I'm also looking forward to having a few days away from home to, work on some new habits that I'm implementing into my life and into my morning and my nighttime routines. I've been finding it hard to get some new routines in place for myself when there's just so much going on with, the family and the household, and trying to get my new habits in line with my family's habits and routines. But also by being in a new place, it's going to help with those new habits because I'm not at home where I'm in the habit of doing all the old habits. Being in a hotel, it's going to kind of be like a pattern disruptor, so I'm super excited. It's hard enough to get new habits in place on your own, let alone when others are influencing your time and space. Implementing new habits and getting rid of old habits is something I've been learning about through my coach recently. It's something that I'll circle back and share with you all perhaps in another few weeks. I'm not going to go into habits this week because I want to wait a few more weeks until I can talk about some of the new habits that I'm currently implementing and old ones that I'm eliminating. But what I will say is that it is all based in brain science, which I love. And like everything, it all starts with your thoughts. Which brings me to the topic of today's podcast, and that is that we can create any outcome we want with our thoughts and our feelings. We get so caught up in our own thoughts that it can skew our perception of all sorts of things. We can get caught in a cycle of judgment because of our thoughts. We can find ourselves having tension with family and friends because of our thoughts. We can completely demean and smash our own confidence through our own thoughts. But we can also heal ourselves through our thoughts, as well as build our confidence and self-worth and achieve things we never thought possible before, all by changing our thoughts. Our subconscious brain is always on. It never sleeps. In fact, while we're asleep, it works even more than when we're awake. But it's always listening to us, whether we're saying something out loud or thinking it to ourselves. Our subconscious sees, hears, and knows everything we do, think, and say. Which is why when we get down and we speak down to ourselves, we tend to beat ourselves up, and we can end up in this whole spiral of self-doubt, self-pity, and complete negativity. And no one benefits from that, least of all you. Our self-talk is the most important voice we can listen to in our lives. Most of us have a negative voice that tells us we're not worthy, we're not good enough, or that we're going to fail, or worse, we might be seen. These voices are all just bullshit stories that we've had in our subconscious brains since childhood. And they're there because something that happened in our childhood that, it was probably insignificant to your parents, but to a sponge-like child's brain, it was misinterpreted and left you with a feeling of inadequacy or a fear of some kind that's just not relevant in your adult life. So apart from busting all those stories wide open, which to be honest can take a few coaching sessions to work through, for now you can start reprogramming your brain simply by choosing your thoughts. So we are not our thoughts. We are the thinker of our thoughts. We are also not our brain. We are the person observing the brain. What our brain does or doesn't do is independent of us, the person. And just because our brain might be having, say for instance, a mean thought, doesn't make us a mean person. So the more you do this, like anything, with practice, the better you'll get at it. At first, it might feel like you're overanalyzing every single thing because, well, you are. But once you master this formula, you're going to easily be able to shift your thinking and pull yourself out of any negative thoughts and situations. The first thing you need to know is that every single feeling we have starts with a thought. Regardless of what you feel, it starts with a thought. If you think of every possible situation where you would feel a feeling, whether it's a positive or a negative emotion, they all start with a thought, even if it's just a subconscious thought that you're not even, quite aware of. So when you find yourself in a situation and you want to change how you're feeling, you first need to recognize that you're having thoughts. Become aware of what you're thinking and understand your patterns. When you start observing your thoughts, you'll see the reasons why you do and say things. This is called vertical thinking, where you take like a 50-foot overview of your thoughts, as if you were, up above, looking down, analysing your thoughts, your life, your actions, being just the thinker of your thoughts. The alternative to vertical thinking, which is what most of us do until we know any different, is horizontal thinking. And that's where we have one thought, we have another thought, and those thoughts lead to 100 other thoughts. It can lead us to places and stories that are completely made up in our minds and completely untrue. It takes us on thought tangents that can get out of control. And when our thoughts are not in check, it leads to reacting to other people's stuff, casting doubt and judgment upon ourselves and others, and insecurity. It can seriously lead us down a rabbit hole to shit town. And because our thoughts create our feelings, once we have all these thoughts, we then have all the emotions that go along with those thoughts. We let other people trigger things in us, and we end up in the crappy mood, having the crappy day, bitching about other people, when really all they were probably doing was just going about their day and doing their thing. But with vertical thinking and taking the 50-foot overview, we get to step back from our thoughts and not get caught up in them. We get to analyse them and choose how we react to them. Do you ever notice the negative thoughts that you're thinking about yourself? Once you're more aware of your negative self-talk, the patterns and how you react to them, you'll be able to catch yourself before you react to them, because you can recognise and acknowledge that they're just thoughts. Most thoughts are illusions anyway, because they've come through your filter of experience and bias and limiting beliefs. When you can recognise a thought is just a thought, and you've recognised that you have the ability to spot your thoughts and analyse them, knowing the thoughts aren't you, because you are the thinker of your thoughts, you can start changing your behavioural patterns. You get to start choosing thoughts to replace your old thoughts with. Once you've identified a thought as just that, if it's a thought that you don't want to be having, you can simply choose to move your attention. Choose to think about something else. Resisting the thought will only make it want to linger and get stronger. But if you dismiss it instead, by instructing your brain with a simple, I am moving my attention to XYZ, and then you actually move your attention to X, Y, Z, then you can change your thinking. You are where your attention is. So if your attention is on a new thought and not on the old thought, then you aren't there with the old thought. Or if it's a thought that is causing you to feel doubt, insecurity, fear, anxiety, frustration, resistance, anger, sadness, then you've got two choices. You can either choose to move your attention, or you can sit with that negative feeling. Actually sit with that emotion and actually feel it. Don't be afraid of feeling the negative emotions because they are no big deal. Don't push them down and hope they go away because stuffing them down will only cause them to rise up again later. Feelings are just vibrations, so we shouldn't be scared of how they make us feel or what might happen if we feel them. Ask yourself what's the worst that could happen if you were to feel this particular emotion. And the more we practice these negative emotions, particularly things like fear or embarrassment or humiliation, the better we are at feeling them when they do arise in the future. If we make the choice at the thought level, we can be deliberate in our reaction. When we allow emotions and we practice feeling them, we won't be freaked out when they do occur, and we won't try to stuff them down for later. We don't always want to be feeling happy, despite what everyone says of, I only want to be happy. We don't always want to be happy. Like if we're grieving, we want to feel sad for as long as we feel necessary. Allowing ourselves to feel what we want to feel gives us peace. You then get to decide what you're going to start thinking on purpose. If you don't tell your brain what to focus on or think about, it's going to go back to its old patterns because that's what brains do, which it's usually all the things that we're trying not to do. We can still allow all of our thoughts and feelings to happen, but by analysing them through vertical thinking, we get to decide whether to react to them or not. We get to decide if it's true for us or not. When we allow ourselves to feel an emotion, we can apply vertical thinking and analyse the thought creating it. When we resist it, we can't understand it. If we understand and allow everything, we can own it and release it. So if your thoughts are all of the not good enough kind, greet that thought with compassion. Notice that's what you're thinking. Be curious. Why are you making that choice? Acknowledge it is something you're choosing to think and have compassion for yourself. When analysing your thoughts, start asking yourself questions because our brains love answering questions. Oftentimes when we find ourselves in a place of judgment where we're beating ourselves up over something, we need to stop the self-beating and get curious. Instead of beating yourself up about eating that piece of chocolate cake at 10 p.m. when you weren't even hungry, get curious and ask yourself why you ate it. Have compassion for yourself and know that there is an underlying reason. You just need to find it through questions and observing your thoughts. If someone yells at me, I can choose how I react. I can choose to feel the anger and frustration and either hang on to it or let it go, or I can choose to observe the other person's behaviour, knowing that it's all about them and probably not about me. If you constantly choose to feel positive, wonderful things that you truly believe about yourself, you're going to feel so much better and you'll get better at thinking positive thoughts about yourself. Stop beating yourself up and having all those negative thoughts and then thinking negatively about yourself for beating yourself up, which is basically beating yourself up again. Instead, observe your thoughts, question your thoughts, be curious about your thoughts, be fascinated that you're choosing these thoughts, question why you're choosing them, and ask what rewards they're giving you or why you're even thinking of the questions. But make your questions good questions, because if you ask a crappy question, your brain is going to give you negative thoughts. Ask positive questions and the thoughts will be positive. What makes me happy? What do I love doing? Why am I here? What or who am I grateful for? All those sorts of things. Remind yourself what you want your brain to be thinking. If it has always been told negative things, that's all it knows how to do. But you can change it by reprogramming your brain. Find out what you're thinking and become aware of it. Decide to start changing how you feel by changing how you think. Even go write down all your thoughts and see how that makes you feel. Usually when we're feeling anger or frustration, it's a reflection of us. Like maybe we're actually angry at ourselves for doing or not doing something, or not taking responsibility for our own life. When we come from a place of negative emotion, we usually speak in an unfiltered manner. An example in my own home is the mornings and getting our daughter Sydney off to school. My husband and I both work from home. We have the cabinet making business here. We've even got the factory here on our acreage, and both of our offices are here in the house. My husband can start work down the shed some days at 7 a.m. or other days he's working out on site. He can be out the door before 6 a.m. I always do the school drop-offs in the morning, and I start work when I get back at about 8:30, but sometimes I might have an early morning coaching call and be in my office at 6 a.m. No two mornings are ever really the same in our house, but the one thing that does stay consistent is that Graham makes Sydney and his lunches the night before, thankfully. And in the mornings, I just need to make sure that both she and I are, showered and dressed and hair done and teeth brushed and all the things, so we can get out the door at 8 o'clock for school drop-off. If I do have an early call, I'm all dressed and ready even before my 6 a.m. call, and I'm usually finished between 7 and 7:30. So at least I've got that half hour to make sure she's all ready to go. Until a few months ago, every single morning was a battle that I felt I lost. And when I say I lost, she still got out the door and off to school in one piece with everything she needed, but I lost. Because I lost my cool, I lost my temper, I lost my way nearly every single morning. Sydney would spend forever, playing with the dogs instead of getting dressed. She'd want to go down to see Daddy in the shed instead of having breakfast or putting her shoes on. She would sometimes put more effort into pretending to brush her teeth than actually brushing her teeth. She would forget to do things I asked her to do, a split second after I'd asked, and I spent the whole time just nagging her. Oh, and her hair. Oh my God. Doing her hair is a freaking drama. Yes, lucky girl. She inherited curly hair from both Graham and I, and it's long and very easily knotted. She cannot stand still, keep straight, and she just constantly complains that it hurts. Doing her hair inevitably always ends up in an argument that she forgets about 5 seconds later, but always leaves me kind of brooding. So by the time we finally get into the car with everything we needed, I was feeling dishevelled and, as my mother-in-law would say, like the wreck of Hesperus. It never, ever started my day well. Then about 6 months ago, one of my besties, who is an ICU nurse, was telling me a story of a woman in her 40s who dropped her kids at school and later collapsed at the gym from a heart attack and sadly died shortly after. We don't know the circumstances of that poor woman's morning, but Wendy said after having her come into ICU that morning, it made her think about how that woman's morning had gone. What were her last words to her kids? Was she a bit like Wendy and I, dropping our kids off at school in that flustered state, having spent the morning yelling at them? Or did she in fact drop those kids to school with love and kindness, leaving them with a beautiful last memory of their mother? While speaking with Wendy that day, I cried so hard. She cried. We just sat on the phone and cried together. For that young woman, for ourselves, for our kids, for our precious lives. We don't want that for our kids. So from that day on, and I know she's doing this too, I have thrown everything I've learned through my coaching into our morning routines. And if the mood gets scratchy or naggy before we get in the car, I change things up in the car by, popping on some happy music and singing our way to school, or we engage in unusual, interesting conversations instead of driving in a crappy silence. I take that 50-foot overview of our morning. I observe how I'm reacting to Sydney and how I don't always need to be right. If she forgets to fill her water bottle, I just do it because it's a damn sight quicker than nagging her to do it. But it makes our mornings easier. I also now use a special conditioner in her hair, so even that's now easy too. Mostly I observe my thoughts and I choose my thoughts, which in turn changes my feelings and my reactions. We've also implemented a reward system, and she's got a list of little jobs she has to do in the morning, right down to putting shoes and socks on, brushing her teeth, smiling and having an amazing day. The list has helped a lot. But when Sydney does drag her feet in the mornings, which she does very well, instead of choosing to be angry or frustrated at her, I redirect her to her list, remind her of the reward, and I choose to be kind and loving. I choose my thoughts and I choose my feelings. I used to beat myself up on the way home from school drop-off for being such a shitty mum in the mornings, but now I don't need to. And I just listen to some uplifting music, which puts me in an awesome mood and sets me up for a really productive work day. I could have just held on to a story that Sid was making life difficult for me in the mornings, that Sid wanted to annoy me, that Sid enjoyed pissing me off, but none of those would be true. Because to be honest, none of it was about me. It was just the way she is. I needed to learn her language, and I needed to choose my responses and reactions. I do keep saying that everything's a story for good reason, and it also relates to choosing your thoughts and your feelings. I'm about to tell you a story that I feel a bit silly telling, but it's going to demonstrate exactly why we need to observe our thoughts, question them, and redirect them, and how we can make a story out of anything. A few weeks ago, I had come out from putting Sid to bed, and Graham was at his desk drawing up a job. He asked me what I was going to do now. Most nights I would go into my office and either work or do some study. On this particular night, I said I was going out to the lounge room to watch The Bachelorette. Yes, that's my guilty pleasure. His response was, "Oh, nice for some." Knowing him, it was just a joke and he meant nothing by it. But that night, I felt like he perhaps meant it. I went out to the lounge room and I made a choice. I thought, I'm not going to let his negative mood affect me. This is his mood, not mine. So I sat there and I happily read and I watched TV. Then, when it was bedtime, I was sensing some tension and I just chose not to engage in it. I just got into bed, kissed him goodnight, and in my mind, as soon as I'd done that, I kind of felt him relax. I felt so proud of myself for not engaging in his negative mood. Anyway, the next day I mentioned something about it to him and he said he wasn't in a bad mood at all and his comment was just a joke. But to my mind, it hadn't sounded like a joke, hence the whole frickin' story I made up in my head. So I spent that night thinking he was in a bad mood when he wasn't, but fortunately for me, I chose not to engage in his supposed bad mood, which meant I didn't fuel the situation. But had I not made those choices, I could have sat there brooding all night that he was pissed off at me, and I would have made up even more stories about the situation. In hindsight, ultimately, what probably happened was I was the one feeling guilty for watching some TV while he was working, and I just made up all this shit, which could have ended in an argument. So you can see that by taking that 50-foot overview of your thoughts, observing them, questioning them, and redirecting by choosing new thoughts and new feelings, you can end up with a completely different outcome. That's all I've got for this week. I'm now off to start packing for my wonderful weekend away. If you want to see some behind the scenes action at one of the leading women in business retreats on the Gold Coast this weekend, jump on over to my Instagram page at makaela.more and follow along with my IG stories. Thanks for listening. I'll speak to you next week. And that, my beautiful friends, is another episode of the Midlife Awakening. If you'd like more inspiration or to connect with other midlifers, head on over to my Facebook group, Deliberately Transformed. You'll find the link in the show notes. Until next time, cheers.